This video is sponsored by Describe, and hopefully you have checked out Describe by now. They offer finely crafted box text to inspire and aid your tabletop role-playing game. You want dragons? Boy, do they have text on dragons. Ancient dragons, wormling dragons, hidden dragons, dragons on a stick. With a great, easy-to-use website, lots of free content, and loads to explore, check out Describe today by going to describe.com/Jordan with a PH in the middle. New lore to talk about. It isn't every day that new official universe creation myths come out that alter our known perceptions of Dungeons and Dragons, but here we are with Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. Hello everybody, Jordan here, the PH is silent, and normally I make videos on lore from an old Dragon Magazine article or a small paragraph from the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons days, but not today. No, we are examining the first world myth, the dragons that were there, and the D&D Multiverse explained in the latest book from Wizards of the Coast. If you're just jumping into D&D, you might not be familiar, but there are a lot of campaign settings. Like a lot. There are, quote, official ones owned by Wizards of the Coast, such as Eberron and the Forgotten Realms, and there are older ones that they own that they haven't remade or released for the latest version of D&D as of filming this video. Like your Spelljammers, your Dark Suns, your Greyhawks. And then there are third-party publishers that have their own campaign settings, such as Midgard from Kobold Press and 90% of the tabletop RPG Kickstarter scene right now. Next, there are licensed campaign settings like Lankmar, Diablo 2, or Warcraft. And finally, there's your setting. And that's the one that you play in and that you make and you build all on your own. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of D&D campaign settings, and well, probably more than that. And thus far, only a few of them have ever really touched one another. Now, if you wanted to play in the Forgotten Realms, you did, or Dark Sun, you did. With Planescape and Spelljammer, there was an idea to combine certain, but not all, the worlds together. So you could travel from Forgotten Realms to Dragonlance if you wanted to. The more campaign settings that have been popping up, it seems like Wizards of the Coast wants to combine them all into a mega setting. Especially with Magic the Gathering coming into 5e, I get a feeling that they want to unify them all. And that's where the first world mythology comes in. So here's the book, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, that contains a whopping 4 pages of lore that changed the origin stories for most other campaign settings. Is it not a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt for so small a thing? So what is the first world, and what is all this lore that involves dragons? This creation myth takes place before the creation myths of any other campaign setting ever. Hashtag so saith Watsy. It is the very, very beginning, and there are some aspects that I kind of like and others that I find a little bit confusing. The idea is that before everything that existed, there were 2 primordial dragons, Bahamut and Tiamat, who worked together to create the prime material plane, which was not many different worlds or planes or crystal spheres or however you want to describe it. It was a giant singular place, perhaps infinite, much like the Plane of Fire or the 9 Hells. It was the center spoke of the Great Wheel. Bahamut and Tiamat, who are not gods exactly, but they have godlike powers, created this plane to be a home for dragons. Using the same primordial energy during the creation of the prime material plane, they made dragons. And they said, go forth and draconify. Now, this creates a connection to dragons and the prime material plane, which I do really like. They are the original creatures of the prime material plane, and they are part of it. Most other creatures are migrants to the prime material plane. Elves from the Feywild, humans and dwarves were made by their gods. With D&D, most creatures have a physical and spiritual connection. Now, if a creature is not native to the prime material plane and they just have that spiritual connection, then when they die on the prime material plane or they're destroyed, they get pulled back into their native realm. Now, this is the case for devils and demons. Humanoid creatures in D&D that were made by the gods are dual-natured. When their physical body dies, it stays with the prime material plane, but their spiritual self moves on to the outer planes. This is not the same for dragons. who are only physical connected. They don't have a spiritual side. They are only of the prime material plane, which is an odd thought to think that these sentient ancient dragons technically don't have a soul, or at least they don't have a soul in the human sense. In the first world myth, Bahamut and Tiamat together created Sardior, who is or was the draconic god of night, psionics, and secrets, but most commonly known as the master of gem dragons. Sardior in older D&D lore floats around in a ruby palace that orbits planets in the material plane, always hiding in the shadows so rarely seen. It is often mistaken for a small red moon. Now, after the creation of Sardior, Bahamut and Sardior went off and crafted metallic dragons, while Tiamat crafted chromatic ones. Then there was some kind of catastrophe involving the gods who wanted to take the prime material plane, or perhaps it was just a war in general against the dragons. It doesn't feel really clear, and I'm sorry to the person who wrote this poem, the Elegy of the First World, but it's really hard to follow and feels annoyingly vague on purpose. Sardior apparently died during this catastrophe, and as the ruby dragon splintered and fell, that Sardior-ness, or his consciousness, became the gem dragons that have appeared on numerous worlds. The point, though, is the gods saw this as a great location for their creations as well, and so the prime material plane is populated with humans and elves who on death return to the outer planes to be with their god. Now I want to pause, time out, and talk about how Wizards of the Coast wants to treat their intellectual properties, specifically their campaign settings. From an author, reader, and player perspective, it is fun for every campaign to have an Orcus or a Tiamat. You might not play a Greyhawk game, but you know who Mordenkainen is, and it's a fun surprise to see him in Barovia. The general idea is that we all know who Orcus is, but everyone has a different Orcus story from their personal games. Now, Wizards of the Coast said in a blog post article thing that they want to treat their intellectual property much like how Disney treats Marvel and just kind of comic books in general. Now, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing we're going to get a multiverse of sorts going forward with Dungeons & Dragons. This makes comic, movie, or game storylines all canonical within that medium, or within the author's vision of those properties at that time. The point really hits home as the First World explains that there are lots of dragons and draconic gods that go by many names, but are actually probably Bahamut and Tiamat. The book says Paladine from Dragonlance could easily be Bahamut, and probably is. Takesis could easily be Tiamat. All the stories involving Paladine and Takesis, if you multiverse hop over to the Forgotten Realms, could be the same stories, only we call them Bahamut and Tiamat. There is a Bahamut and Tiamat-ness that is shared between campaign settings. This goes further with magic items. There isn't one orb of dragonkind. There are probably thousands of them, all created differently, but with a similar outcome and titled the Orb of Dragonkind. This also means that there are maybe hundreds of Vecna hands hanging out in the multiverse. There is no longer one White Plume Mountain and one Black Razor Greatsword, which means that it's okay when you and your best friend show up with 2 Black Razors for an Adventures League game. It's also a very essentialistic approach to this mythological design, meaning it follows Plato and Aristotle's essentialism. Yeah, we're going Greek philosophy for just a second, but stay with me. Plato thought that everything in the universe had an essence to it, and that essence is what made it a specific thing. So you can have dozens of different kinds of knives, but the blade is probably what makes it a knife. Could have a wooden handle, carved from bone, maybe it's made of metal. It doesn't matter as long as it has a blade. Take away the blade and its essential property is gone, and you're left with something that is not a knife. Essentially. The first world mythology for D&D is the origin of that essential property for dragons, and it probably will be used for a lot of other things in the future. There is some kind of essence to Bahamut and Tiamat, and although it might change from campaign setting to campaign setting, whatever that essential Bahamutness is can appear in your game. Players understand what a Bahamut is, they have outside game knowledge to know that one Bahamut from one campaign setting might not be the same in another, but it's still Bahamut. Now this goes further with the idea of dragon sight, which is, quote, little known phenomenon that supports the central ideas expressed in Elegy for the First World. This is the idea that there are dragons who are aware of themselves in other campaign settings. In the book, they specifically bring up the red dragon Ashardalon, who has famously been a part of D&D for a while now. Now, there are many different Ashardalons in various multi-universes who have become aware of each other and could potentially plot together to change or shape the multiverse, to really conquer it, to canker it. Okay, I'm done. This essential property established in the First World mythos also gives us the baseline for draconic behavior. All metallic dragons will, for the most part, behave good. Chromatic dragons will behave evil, and all dragons will have hordes because it is a part of what makes a dragon a dragon. It's an essential property to dragonness. So my question to you is a multiverse a big cop-out to a living Forgotten Realms? Is established canon for any campaign setting essentially just a multiverse version? Meaning somewhere we still have a 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition Dritz to Erden running around. And what if they all meet and take down, I don't know, Dr. Octavius? Did my YouTube channel just become null and void because all lore and no lore seem to matter at the exact same time? Let's discuss in the comments below. Thank you again, Describe, for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check out their website with a link down in the doobly-doo. And here's a video on gem dragons that came out before Fizban's book and has information on Sardior, plus an article from 3rd edition, all linked down below. Also, I want to plug that I have a second channel where I talk about non-Dungeons & Dragons role-playing games that I love. Go check that out. It's called Jordan's Jocular Junction. Subscribe and watch all of my solo videos on Dungeon Crawl Classics. Thanks for watching, everyone. I will see you all in the next video.